Greetings. This is the sermon for the first Sunday of Christmas, and the reading being preached on is Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 23. Today's story from Matthew's Gospel is certainly one of the more challenging stories about the infancy and early childhood of Jesus. After the wise men, or magi, leave Bethlehem, Joseph is warned in a dream to take Mary and Jesus and escape to Egypt to flee the wrath of Herod. In the story of the wise men, you will remember, the wise men come to Jerusalem and ask, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." In response to their query, the story says that when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. Herod obviously viewed the child born King of the Jews as a threat, as he himself claimed the title King of the Jews, ruling at the pleasure of Rome. Herod tries to trick the Magi into showing him where to find Jesus, but after they come to Bethlehem and give Jesus their gifts, they are warned in a dream not to return to Herod and to leave for their own country by another road. King Herod's plan had been foiled. This Herod, by the way, had been given the title Great. He was Herod the Great. And in today's story from Matthew's Gospel, we find out just the sort of thing that the great do. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Thus was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, because they are no more. Although this massacre is not reported in any other historical account, it is just the sort of thing Herod the Great would have done. He had multiple members of his own family put to death out of fear that they represented a challenge to his rule, including one son just 5 days before his own death. This story demolishes the hallmark sentimentality that so often enwraps the Christmas story. This story is challenging in a number of ways. For us, it might raise the question, pointedly made by one commentator, of how a gracious God could deliver his own son from danger while leaving the other children in Bethlehem to perish under Herod's wrath. Now, Matthew's Gospel does not directly answer this question as part of this story, but one way of looking at it is to say that, in the end, God does not deliver Jesus from danger. Instead, Jesus dies while enduring terrible suffering, in solidarity with all other innocent sufferers, such as the children of Bethlehem massacred by Herod. Matthew's Gospel even suggests that Jesus experienced abandonment by God with his cry of dereliction from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I don't know whether there is a satisfactory answer to such questions, we will always have to wrestle with the paradoxes and apparent contradictions surrounding innocent suffering that arise whenever we proclaim God's goodness as revealed in the person and work of Jesus. In any case, today's story from Matthew's Gospel is important because it tells a profound truth about the way of the so-called great in this world. It reveals the violence inherent in the exercise of power and the lengths the powerful are willing to go to in order to preserve their power. And a cursory glance at the news these days will affirm the truthfulness and insightfulness of this story. Matthew's Gospel tells this story not only in order to speak truth to power, but primarily to show how Jesus' life recapitulates the experience of God's people. Like the patriarch Jacob and his family, Jesus' family goes to Egypt. Like the Israelites, Jesus' family recapitulates the Exodus by returning from Egypt to the land of Israel. The massacre of the innocents of Bethlehem recalls Pharaoh's orders to kill the male children of the Israelites. And Matthew's Gospel, by quoting the prophet Jeremiah in telling of that slaughter, connects it to the exile to Babylon of God's people. For Matthew's Gospel, then, the story of God's people Israel is the story of Jesus, and the story of Jesus is the story of God's people. Israel's story typologically prefigures Jesus' story. The reason why this is important is that, according to Matthew's Gospel, it demonstrates, first of all, that Jesus truly is the Messiah, which is why Matthew's Gospel makes a point of quoting or paraphrasing the Scriptures, the Old Testament, 3 times in just this story alone. Jesus' life fulfills the Scriptures. Second of all, the connection between Jesus' story and the story of God's people Israel, according to Matthew's Gospel, shows that Jesus, as the Messiah, as God's chosen one, indeed as Emmanuel, God with us, has suffered as God's people have suffered. Jesus' experience, both in this story and at the end of his life, visibly demonstrates God's solidarity with those who suffer. What this means is that when we suffer, as indeed we all will, we can trust that Jesus, whom we profess as Savior, Messiah, and Lord, intimately knows what we are going through, as his own story reflects the suffering of God's people as told in the Scriptures. While we still have to wrestle with the mystery of suffering, we know that Jesus has suffered in solidarity with all who suffer. What is more, in Jesus, God has acted to do something about the suffering of God's people. Much of Jesus' own mission was to alleviate the suffering of God's people, and his mission has been an example for Christians down the ages. Since the beginning of the Church, Christians have worked to alleviate sickness and poverty, founding hospitals, soup kitchens, and the like. Jesus also challenged the powerful of his day, one of the reasons why he was eventually put to death. Today's story from Matthew's Gospel speaks a powerful truth about the ways of the so-called great of this world. And because Jesus' life was spared in this instance, he could live to show that God is opposed to the abuse of power, which was and continues to be so common among the powerful. So the story of Jesus, as Matthew's Gospel tells it, is both a source of comfort and an example to us, a source of inspiration. Matthew's Gospel reveals that God is opposed to the abuse of the least of these by the great, and that, both in Jesus and in the Church, God is at work to heal the world.